Hi, Keith Marchiano, Senior Executive Coach for Paxade Academy, and welcome to Sales Pitch Podcast. Today we're going to be diving into results selling framework and buyer personas. Today in the real world and how changes and decisions are made in business come in different ways and by different people. Real world, office manager, operations manager, sees a problem that's impacting their part of the company. They have a leadership meeting, and depending on their organizational makeup, they bring that issue to the leadership team. They have a conversation around it. That leadership team's going to want to know is like, hey, what happened, when you brought this issue to the current IT provider? Have you brought it to the current IT provider? So when they're ready to pull the trigger, that executive team's going to meet, and somebody's going to give them the thumbs up to say, okay, go ahead and start the search. If you're one of the lucky ones, you come in via referral, because that's the first thing they're going to do. They're going to ask people that they know, other executives, hey, who are you using for IT services? And if you're there, great. If you're been searched by a website, if they tell you, hey, we found you on the web, most likely somebody came in for a referral, so you have ground to make up. So what happens? You go in, they tell you their problems. You tell them how great your people are. You kind of talk about what you do and how you maybe solved that problem. And then you throw a proposal in front of them. Then boom, they're gone. Ghost town. All of a sudden they stop returning your calls, stop returning your emails. Eventually you find out, hey, they decided to go with another provider. Or worse yet, they just stayed with their current provider and dealt with the mistakes because you didn't connect with them. So in today's business world, it's very rare that you're dealing with just one buyer. Typically, you're dealing with more than one buyer. And those buyers are either economic buyers or technical buyers. We're going to cover them both here today. Oh, and there may be more than one of each of those. So we're going to sit down and discuss today on identifying buyer personas and putting yourself into the shoes of that buyer. James, welcome back to Sales Pitch Podcast. Welcome
Thanks,
back,
Keith.
my friend.
I appreciate it, man. It's been a long time. You're rocking and rolling. You're putting good value out there to the people that need it the most, right? So, yeah, thanks for having me back.
I think this is going to be an exciting episode because a lot of our listeners and a lot of IT service providers really struggle to connect and identify the buyers that are out there. So I think it'll bring a lot of value. So before we jump into that, so in case somebody didn't watch our very first podcast when you and I kind of teased up what results selling framework was, give a little intro about yourself, please.
Sure. Yeah. James LaVine. I'm a senior coach at Paxade Academy. But prior to all of that, I actually owned and operated my own MSP for 25 years, and I actually had a marketing company in parallel with it. And so I didn't have any other partners. It was me, and I did all my own sales until I built out my sales team, which was further down the road. So everything you're going to be learning is firsthand experience.
And you've been a coach with us now for what, over 2 years, correct?
Yeah, over 2 years. Giving back to the community and doing my best to share all my scars and pain and a million ways how not to do the business and make sure they do it right. So definitely giving back to the MSP community.
Isn't that always the case? Like somebody brings up something that we know we did and we tried and it didn't wind up well. We kind of cringe about like, ooh, don't do that.
Yep. Like don't go down that path because I've already been there and that was my first few gray hairs or it cost me 6 figures. It's like, you don't want to go down that path.
So when we get into results selling framework, before we even get in front of somebody, like I kind of teed it up on the intro, is like, and we're going to talk about it today, is like today's buyer is a lot more savvy and has a lot more information at their fingertips. So why do you think it's important to know all the people involved in the buying decision or the buying process?
That's a great question, Keith, and it's interesting because people are diverse, right? There's no two people who are alike, and when you're just going into a selling situation, even at the very beginning, when you're just learning of the opportunity or learning about the challenges they're facing, it's important to be able to understand the different types of people involved, and how you address them is not always going to be exactly the same. It's really critical that you learn to adjust your speech and learn to give them different data or details or whatever it is they need for you to be able to build rapport, uncover challenges, and then start to develop out the actual sales process.
Yeah, good points. When you get into it from a standpoint of you're talking about different personalities, we're going to hit on that in the next podcast about uncovering needs. Is like different people have different personalities, right? And
Yeah.
some of them, it's harder to get them involved in the conversation than others.
Yeah, very much so. In fact, you already said it at the very beginning about the economic buyer and the technical buyer, and they are very two different mindsets. I know, Keith, we're probably going to get more into detail on that, so I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but that's really going to be the simplest way for a person who's looking at going into the sales side of this, or especially the result selling framework, to just think there's a technical buyer. What do they look like? How do they think? Versus the economic buyer. What do they look like and how do they think?
So let's get into it, right? That's a great segue. So what are some of the characteristics, like when you say technical buyer, what are some of those characteristics?
Yeah, you nailed it right at the very beginning. The person who's that front line, we think IT person, right? Because we think technical, but it may not always be an IT person. It could be an office manager. It could be, depending on how big a business you're going after, it could be the CIO, the CFO. It could be somebody who's in the weeds, needs the details. Definitely somebody who's affected by the issue. And 9 times out of 10, they're like, this is affecting productivity. This is affecting us. We need to come up with a solution. They go to the economic buyer, which I know we'll talk about in a minute. And am I authorized to go out and find an answer to this? And so then they go on the technical hunt, right? To find a way to solve the problems that they're facing.
So when you look at somebody that is a technical buyer, what's some of their characteristics, their personality traits that you're going to see potentially as you go through the cycle here?
I love this. This is actually part of my favorite part of the selling cycle, is learning how to read people. I love it. Absolutely love it. One of the very first things you'll notice is a technical buyer is always extremely detailed. They need accuracy. They need details. They're not wishy-washy. They don't want to hear all these long, drawn-out stories. They're hyper-focused on, we think we know what the problem is. We're looking for the solution. Will you actually solve it? And they want details on how you're going to do it. And a quick way to read them also is that they're extremely organized. They're very realistic. They don't want to hear maybe, possiblies, could be's. They want to know the reality of this, the pros and the cons in detail. And so we all know this kind of people where, tell me more about this, and and they use a lot of hows in their questions. They also are very no nonsense. Get to the point, hyper focused. I like to say it's like eagle eyes on something. They're just very focused in on something. Don't give me all the extra stuff. Here's where we're at. They're very formal. And a lot of times their rate of speech is slower because they want to, like, I'm going to slow my speech down. They want detail. Keith, tell me more about this issue. How are you going to solve this, Keith? And so forth and so on. And so it's your prototypical business professional, especially the way they dress. That's another one. You'll see that they're always clean pressed, got to look perfect all the time. Perfection is one of the words that this particular type of group talks about. They're perfectionists by nature, very analytical in their thinking. And so that's the typical technical buyer.
Those are great points. And I want to kind of pivot on the one thing, kind of add on to the one thing where you say the way they dress. Like I did a lot of work with construction companies. And most of the time I was talking to, like you said, director of operations was like the point person because they were in the trenches and saw really the impact of what was going on with their company. And you would think construction, jeans, t-shirt, like the operations manager would be, if it was jeans, nice pair of jeans, typically nice polo shirt, right? Even when you got into the executive team, you saw that, right? Versus, you get in the field, obviously you see something different, but the operation, even director of operations, very kind of, like you said, very organized. But more importantly, I think from a key standpoint, it's like hey, here's my problem. What are you going to do about it? Right? That's what they want to know. So kind of keep that in mind if you're listening. Like if you're talking about like how great your people are and how great your service is, that's not going to resonate with that technical buyer. And I'm glad
No.
you said that right out of the gate, because typically when I coach this, like, oh, that's typically like the IT person or the person that has the most technical knowledge. I'm like, no, no, no. Like we're just using that as a phrase. They're involved in it enough to know what problems are going on with their technology. They may not be hands on to actually be fixing the technology.
Yeah. I also like to consider them as the gatherers. They're gathering information and they need detailed information because they're not going to present sloppy information. They're just a consummate professional. They need facts, they need details. And when you're selling to them, you have to be detail oriented in your numbers and in your data when you're telling the stories, things that you'll learn in the result selling framework. Very detail oriented. So it's critical. Well, yeah.
They are your champion. So when you're going through this process, they're the person you need to get on your side. And we'll
Exactly.
talk about that next week with kind of like uncovering needs. But you got to be fighting for them
Yeah.
100%. How are you going to help them get in their shoes for a little bit? They're the ones that are going to make you win or lose this opportunity. So that's a technical buyer. What's an economic buyer?
Oh boy. This is my world. So as the former owner of my own company, I was the economic buyer. And so the economic buyer is that person who they look at the bigger picture. They're usually the owner or the senior partner, somebody who's large and in charge, right? That personality style. And they're the ones who hold the purse strings. They decide, should I allocate money from this to that, move money around in order to make the deal happen? Is this something worth it? And usually the technical buyer gathers all the data and presents it to the economic buyer. And that's one of the challenges we have on the sales side is, we're taught get everybody in the same room, but if you can't, then there's this other option. How do you actually help the technical buyer get all their ducks in a row and present the right kind of case and the right kind of solution so the economic buyer is willing to actually shift the money around to pay for the deal?
And we'll get into that probably a couple courses from now, decision criteria and finding that out. And it's getting kind of like you said, how do you get all the stakeholders to the dance? So kind of like we did with the technical buyer, what are some characteristics, traits of the economic buyer?
Yeah, this one's easier to spot. They're harder to get a hold of, very elusive, but it's definitely easier to spot because this will be that one person that everybody goes to nonstop. Usually, especially in the smaller companies, maybe 25 to 50 employees, they're the point person. They make all the decisions. Everything is just dumped on them. They don't really have the full-on team to defer all decision making. They make all the choices. They move the money around, and so when they speak, it's direct, it's to the point, it's affirmative, it is very brief. I call it terse. They're very to the point, very specific, and they have the attitude of do not waste my time. Get to the point. Show me the facts. Give me how's this going to affect my company? Am I going to make money? Am I going to lose money? What's the risk? Just lay it out to the point. Do not waste my time or get out. And it's sad to say that, but that's the prototypical economic
Yeah,
buyer.
they're busy, right? I mean, they've
Yeah.
got multiple other high level things that they're working on, right?
Yep. Yep. The big picture. They're always thinking about the big picture. They're the visionary. If you're looking at EOS, that's just how they see things. And because their head is in the clouds, they don't have time to keep getting pulled back down to earth. They got to stay focused on driving this vision, getting to the goals, and they're going to crack the whip. That's that kind of personality. And you'll find that how I'm talking to you is that faster rate of speech. They think faster, they move faster, they make snap decisions. That's why they're in such a hurry. They don't want to be bothered. And so it's very challenging to be able to present a sales case to an economic buyer. That's one of the reasons why I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, Keith, but you know how this game's played. So they're fun to work with. I know because I was that person, and yep, it's it's. Oh, and here's some other key personality traits. When you go into their office, this is a beautiful one. I didn't really mention this on the technical side. Technical is usually about the prowess of their intellect. They'll have all their degrees on the wall, or they'll talk about their special schooling or education or some type of thing that shows how great they are. On the visionary or the economic buyer side, it's usually accomplishments or something of significance, like shaking the hand with the president, or I started this or sold that. It's usually significant based or achievement based, where it's like, look how great I am, and what I've done, how I've made an impact. It's kind of nice to be able to defer the distinction between the two. They may not dress exactly the same. They usually wear more, I call it primary colors. They're bold, but they don't wear usually not a lot of bling and shiny jewelry. But you'll know by the way they stand, very firm. They're always in that Superman power pose. You can sense the economic buyer.
All right. So here comes the $1 million question. Is this. You're in a meeting, whether it's the proposal meeting or you're in the qualifying stages, and you've got 3 people, 4 people in the room, and it's a makeup of both your technical and economic buyer. Different personalities, different demands. How do you balance that? What should be, if somebody's listening, what should be their conversation piece at that point?
That is a great question. Yeah, I always go back. So because you have both types of buyers in the same room, one of the very first things I look at is, the technical buyer needs to look good, right? Because they're perfectionist. They have a lot of things going on where, do I have the right data? Am I going to look foolish to the economic buyer, the visionary, the owner, or the senior partner? And so you want to make sure that whatever the problem is, it's clearly defined. Then here's the detailed solutions for the technical buyer. And then when the economic buyer says, hey, just give me the bottom line, is this going to work or not? And how much is it going to cost me? Are you prepared to have that conversation? Did you do your due diligence to get all the data, all the problems, the challenges, and do we actually have the right kind of solutions in place? Or even better, can you take charge of the agenda and start adding in other things that maybe the economic buyer and the technical buyer had not thought of? Because of your expertise and experience in this certain area, you can actually add more color and context to these particular challenges that they may not have seen, but we've seen as we solve them across other clients. And so all of a sudden, now they're starting to realize, hey, this isn't just your typical MSP. This is a real partner. And they actually have done this enough that they're instructing us, teaching us, guiding us down this path of things we didn't even know were an idea or a thought or a consequence. And that shifts that whole conversation.
Yeah, it's a great point. And you get it, you always say when you get in there, if it's the qualifying meeting, your very first appointment, and somehow you got, I don't know, you got the 4-leaf clover, and you've got,
right.
The decision makers there, as well as like the operations manager, CFO, CEO, right? They're all sitting there. It's like rare, but if you do, you still need, again, intros, build rapport with all of them. With the economic buyer being there, you want to make sure it's, quick rapport, but still enough to build a bond to start getting them talking about themselves. And then focus your attention on that technical buyer. Director of operations, office manager, typically those titles. And then, when you kind of bring the meeting home, it's like, okay, so what you said is like, here's the problem. Here's how that problem's impacting your company.
Yeah.
What's the cost of that impact to you? Now you're focused on the economic buyer on that side. So, yeah, it's, again, it's from a standpoint, all we're doing is having a conversation. I think we're probably making it more than it is, but if we're not picking that stuff up, right, and we're talking the same way, especially if you get in and start, talking about how great your service is and things like that, that economic buyer is going to be short-fused and be like, well, you got to end this conversation, or we're not talking to those folks again. Like, all he did was talk about themselves.
Yeah, 100%. It's another thing, I just, as you were saying it, Keith, I was just thinking about the rapport on the economic side. Another thing about, and I failed to bring this up, a characteristic of the economic buyer is that they love to talk about themselves. What's in it for me? The vision of the company. And a great couple of questions is, why did you start the company? What's the vision? Where are you taking this thing? And talk about this thing that they're building. They love to talk about that. Versus the technical buyer who's kind of waiting in the wings of, I got all these questions of 1,000 ways that your solution is going to work, but it's nice to be able to connect with an economic buyer of this business you're building. I respect it. I can see where you're taking this, and they would love to talk about it.
We're going to hit on that next week, building that rapport and hitting, that's a fantastic question. they're an owner. Yeah, see, you started this company 12 years ago. What made you start it? What made you get out of like being a W-2 employee and starting your own company, being an entrepreneur? Love that question. One of the goals of result selling framework is to align how we sell with the way customers want to buy, right? Buyers typically go through 3 stages in their decision process. They articulate the need, right? Then they evaluate options that they have. Then they're going to mitigate risk. They're going to go with the decision that's going to solve that problem that's a low risk to them. So can you provide us an overview of somehow putting us inside that buyer's mind on this, James?
Yeah. It's really funny you brought this up because it's changed so much. We've been inundated with sales and movies and the hard sell and the boiler rooms and all this crazy stuff, and it's just not like that nowadays. It's
Tommy Boy, man.
Yeah, Tommy Boy, exactly. And it's kind of fun because, well, you and I have been around this world for a while, and not to state our age or anything like that, but we have bought vehicles, we've bought homes, we've done things, and that old buying process, right? When we used to go and buy a truck or a car or something, and back in the day, 15, 20 years ago, we had to go onto the lot and we had to get literature and data and all this stuff just so we could get an idea what was happening. And you know how it is now.
Get the price. We didn't know what the price was. You had to get a background, look at the stickers on the window.
Right. They take your keys and your driver's license. You're trapped, and the whole shebang. Right. It was this hard sell and lock you in a room. Oh, the sales manager's going to give us a deal. Oh yeah, okay. But nowadays we got all these apps, and we can do all our own research, and it's literally the buyer is in control. Totally in control of most of the actual sales process. They can get all their data, all their questions. They can research everything. They get all referrals, or not referrals, but reviews. And yeah, by the time they reach the sales side of it, they're ready to go, or they just have questions. And that's where it gets interesting, because now in their mind, if they've already done all this research, you got to be prepared as a salesperson to either understand the research that they've either gathered on the internet, which could be incorrect, or ask questions, go even deeper. What about this? What about that? And to make sure that we've dialed in the exact problem, not necessarily the symptom they want to fix. And then based upon that, how do we go in and solve those particular challenges or problems at the root level and make real change in your business?
Man, I love this. So, don't know if you know this or not, but earlier this month, I bought a brand new truck. Well, it wasn't brand new. It was a used truck. It was a used truck. So, yeah.
Congrats.
So I felt sorry for the sales guy because he was screwed. He was. I knew exactly all these things, but literally what you said completely resonated with me. So I bought it back on February 10th. I was researching this thing at the end of last year. First thing, I knew I wanted a pickup truck. I was looking at reliability, safety ratings. And then when I kind of looked at a bunch of different makes and models, I honed in on one. I was like, okay, now, based on this truck, what year is the most safe, most reliable? And then I was able to hone in, and go to any app. I don't want to, we're not getting paid by anybody, but I don't want to give anybody free advertising. But go to an app and you find out, how much it costs. You can actually watch as the price decreases. It's fantastic. And then from that standpoint, I would just say, is this car still on the lot? I want to come down there this Saturday and test drive it. And it's like, boom. And then, the first time I went for a test drive, I was like, okay, nice. My wife and I talked about it. It's like, it was 2018. Like, yeah, 6-year-old truck. Kind of looking at my research, I'm like, hey, a 20 and a 21 are just as reliable. A little bit newer. Prices are pretty much around the same. Cost of trucks, depreciation value is pretty low. It's good resale value. So this poor sales guy was just like, this is what that truck's not what is not exactly what I want. This is exactly what I want. Let me know when it comes in. I'm going to be checking other dealerships for the same truck. So whoever gives me what I want at the price I want is getting the business. And to your point, The sales guy I went with, he was more focused on it. He actually sent me videos like, hey, Mr. Marchiano, here's, kind of giving you this truck. Here it is, walking around it. Showed me, I wanted to, look, wanted to step up, right? My wife's a little bit short, so I needed her to get a little boost in. My mom's getting old, so make sure she gets in. I wanted the bed liner. I wanted the bed cover. And I wanted enough room for people to travel in the back. And I wanted some, decent tech in there, right? I was looking for a certain mileage, under a certain mileage, all that stuff. But the salesperson, kind of to your point, recognized I had already done my due diligence. I was that economic buyer. It was like, this is what I want. Find it, and you get the business. That's the difference today than it is years ago. Pivot that to IT service providers, kind of put, what we just talked about with trucks and buying vehicles into their mindset.
Yeah, by the way, I'm also in the market for a truck, so I may tap into all your research and shortcut the system a little bit, because
Okay.
I may be doing that exact same thing here soon. Yeah, it's interesting because, well, we all know the power of Google, right? Where do people start? They start Googling, or they actually call up a friend of theirs, somebody else that they're a colleague of or went to college with or whatever, and saying, here's some of the issues. What are you guys facing? They might be part of an association, and seeking other forms of knowledge. But ultimately, they're going to research whatever issue, right? They're going to type it in. My networking doesn't work, or I can't get multi-sites to come online. What could be the issue? And they might even try to self-diagnose and even try to fix it, which is really scary. And based upon that, they're going to take all this data, whether it's accurate or not, and they're going to start formulating a hypothesis, right? They're going to start figuring out, this is exactly how I fix this. And we're not going to do it. We don't have the expertise, so let's shop around. And really, that's the correlation between the two. They're trying to do their own research. However, here's where, as an MSP or an ITSP, internet service provider comes in, or IT service provider comes in, that your expertise, right, that you've done this, there's nuances, things that are not Google searchable, or may not be in white papers easily found that you've done. There's going to be other issues that you can bring to the table. And that's where, after you've figured out who you're going to talk to, right, which buyer persona or both, and adjusting on the fly, you're going to be able to bring real valuable knowledge and wisdom to the situation that they cannot search, they cannot easily find. And that's going to be the differentiator and the value that you can bring to them. Is you did your due diligence, that's wonderful. In fact, most people do. However, did you consider this? That when you do X, Y, and Z, there could be a ramification or a risk. Or have you considered other options? Who says this is the only path? There might be another possible option. In fact, since we talked about how you're going to grow your business, we should be looking at even a better solution. For a few dollars more, you can knock 2 or 3 birds out with one stone. Let's talk about this. Are you open to that? And so that's the correlation. Is we don't live in a vacuum, and a truck is a single item, right? And you got all the options and features. But when we get into troubleshooting actual issues for a business and a lot of the things that are going on, that's when we really craft some beautiful solutions.
Man, that's fantastic. You're absolutely right. So what I discussed in my kind of intro to this conversation was, the buyer already realizes they have a problem, right? They've already went to their current provider to fix it. Current provider is not fixing it, so as a leadership team, they decided to explore some options that are out there.
Yeah.
First things by referral. So if your company name gets as that lucky referral person, that technical buyer is now going to go on the website. They've already reviewed your website. They've also looked at Google reviews, what other people are saying. They may even type your name in, or gone on LinkedIn to type your name in. They're looking at your site to see, hey, what do they provide? If you put industries on there, is my industry on there? Are they an expert around my industry? What's that content? What's that thought leadership on there? Do they truly know me? Right? They're kind of doing that pregame, and if they're not getting the warm fuzzies, that's where they're going to go somewhere else. not go somewhere else by itself. They're going to still probably call you in because you got referred, but they're going to bring in other options. They may call another friend or something, like you said, James, right? That could be the case.
Yeah. Or do the comparative shopping when that's really a bad situation to get in. Then now it's a race to the bottom. Yeah. Well said. Hopefully, I hope that I was just thinking, I hope the listeners are really getting value from this, because this is really critical to be able to understand what you're walking into. I like to say, we, on the technical side, especially as an MSP, we can assess networks and assess security, and we can do all these things, but for some reason we struggle with assessing people. And that's really what this is about, is understanding the people you're talking to and getting into their world and adjusting what you say based upon who you're talking to. It's not overly complex, but for some reason we struggle with it, or we stress it out, or we're so focused on, like you said, Tommy Boy, and getting that sale, that we lose sight of who we're talking to and their actual needs as a person. And I always like to say, when we talk about buyer personas, that they're people, and people matter, and people need help. And you're trying to actually help these people come up with a solution.
Well said. I was actually going to ask you to wrap it up. I couldn't wrap it up any better than that. So yeah, really, if you're watching and you haven't watched Tommy Boy, you got to go watch that. Watch how he kind of got like very anxious about any sales piece. You're just talking to people. I always say is like, you're solving problems, right? And you're the expert at solving potentially the problems that they have and delivering those results. Have an entrepreneurial conversation. Even if you're a salesperson, put yourself on the level of the entrepreneur from that standpoint. You're not an entrepreneur, but talking that level, kind of like James was saying earlier, I think it gets you in that spot. So if, kind of wrap this up, final thoughts. If the buying process represents what the buyer needs at a moment in time, the sales process represents what a seller should be doing at a moment in time to address these needs. Result selling is about what sellers should be saying, better yet, what they should be asking throughout the process, throughout the sales process. James nailed it on the head. Customers, prospects are willing to be led, but only if you can take them to a place that they can't get to on their own. That's probably the easiest way to kind of summarize this up. So hope you enjoyed this podcast. Yeah, thanks again, James, for being on here. Really appreciate you and your knowledge and everything you bring to the listeners. You got it, my friend. So join us next week as we jump into understanding the buyer process, as I'll have Jeremy Nelson back on the show. So again, some more laughs with Jeremy. Thanks for tuning in to Sales Pitch Podcast, Result Selling Framework. We'll see you next time. Gotta start over now.
I'm sorry, man. I couldn't help myself.
James.
You said podcast, like podcast.
Podcast.